My son kicked me out just 4 hours after my husband's funeral. He got $20 million and thought he won. But that night, I opened a safe and found a lock that had waited 20 years. I'm just a 62-year-old woman, but I am the one who wrote the clause that will make him lose everything. My name is Beatrice Langford. I am 62 years old, and 4 hours ago, I buried my husband. The service for Oswald Langford was exactly what he would have wanted: oversized, expensive, and filled with men in dark suits who respected the founder of Red Mesa Developments more than they ever actually liked him. I stood at the front, the picture of a stoic Boulder widow, accepting condolences with a dry-eyed calm. Beside me, my son, Grant, performed his role perfectly. At 38, he was the image of his father, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He gripped his wife Savannah's hand, his face a mask of appropriate grief. But I watched his eyes. While people offered sympathy, Grant's gaze kept drifting to the heavy, antique key ring I held in my pocket. The keys to the house, the office, the legacy. Savannah, meanwhile, was subtly evaluating the jewelry on the other mourners, her sharp little eyes calculating net worths. We returned to the house, the large canyon home Oswald and I had built 20 years ago. The air was thick with the funereal scent of lilies and baked ham. I was about to change out of my black dress when Grant cleared his throat. "Mother," he said, loosening his tie. Savannah was already in the kitchen, pouring herself a large glass of wine. Her shoes kicked off. "We need to discuss logistics," Grant continued. He did not sit. I waited. "I've been looking at some wonderful facilities. Maple Ridge, in particular, seems very secure. I think you should plan to move over there." I felt the air leave the room, replaced by a sudden, cold vacuum. I remained perfectly still. "Maple Ridge is an assisted living facility. Grant, it's practical. Mother." He waved a hand around the expansive living room, dismissing the 2 decades of my life contained within its walls. "This place. It's too much for you. It's an asset." "My home is an asset. It is now," he said, and for the first time, he smiled. It was not a kind smile. The $20 million family trust was dispersed this morning, the moment the death certificate was filed. I processed that. Oswald had been gone less than 72 hours. "It's the end of the old days," Grant said, pacing in front of the unlit fireplace. "Dad was sentimental. He let things slide. I'm not." It was then I realized he had not shed a single tear, not at the hospice, not at the service. His grief was non-existent. All his focus, all his restless energy during the funeral, had been about this moment. He was not mourning a father. He was calculating an inheritance. He had been waiting for the codes to the main vault, the keys to the company files. "I'm going to be optimizing the assets," he announced, sounding like a recording from one of his business seminars. "That starts with selling this house. I'm merging all the secondary accounts into the primary holding. And frankly, the Oswald Langford Tower sounds dated. I'm having the nameplate removed from the building on Monday." He was erasing his father. He was erasing me. I walked to the kitchen counter, past Savannah, who was scrolling through her phone, and poured myself a cup of tea. The porcelain was steady in my hand. I let the silence stretch, letting him enjoy his pronouncements. I turned back to him, my voice even, almost conversational. "Grant, you are the new head of the trust. I'm sure you've done your diligence. You certainly read Appendix D of the Evergreen Trust Agreement. He scoffed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. Appendix D. That unenforceable sentimentality clause Dad's lawyer told me about it. It's void. Mother. It's meaningless. Is it? I asked. He dismissed me with a wave. Pack your bags. The real estate agent is coming Thursday. He and Savannah left, heading to their own perfect, sterile home, leaving me alone in the house I was being evicted from. That night, I did not pack. I went to my sewing room, a small, quiet space filled with spools of thread and patterns. I knelt on the floor and rolled back the braided rug. Beneath it, under a false floorboard beneath the leg of my old Singer sewing machine, was a small, cloth-lined safe. I did not need a key. I used the code. Inside, resting on velvet, was a single, thick envelope. On the front, in my own handwriting from 2 decades ago, were 5 words. Only open when betrayed. I broke the wax seal. The contents of that envelope were my life's work, hidden in plain sight. Grant, like Oswald, always underestimated me. They saw the wife, the mother, the woman who arranged flowers and hosted dinners for investors. They forgot, or perhaps chose to ignore, what I did before Red Mesa Developments became an empire. I was not just a wife. I was a freelance accountant. My clients were not corporations. They were churches, community funds, and non-profits. Organizations built on faith and donations, where every single penny had to be tracked. I became an expert in internal audits, in finding the small leaks, the quiet frauds, and the structural weaknesses that others missed. I was the one who ensured that trust, once given, was not abused. Oswald was a brilliant builder. He could see a barren stretch of Colorado desert and envision a skyline, but he was a gambler, a man who loved risk, who thrived on leverage. He built his company on handshake deals and borrowed capital. I was the one who made it legal. I spent the first decade of our marriage sitting at our kitchen table, turning his chaotic genius into clean ledgers and structured, taxable entities. I created the order that allowed his ambition to flourish. We argued, always, about Grant. Oswald saw a successor. He wanted to forge Grant in his own image, to hand him a kingdom. I wanted Grant to be self-sufficient. I wanted him to understand the value of $1 earned, not just $1 inherited. The more Oswald pushed Grant into the business, the more entitled and arrogant my son became. In our 20th year of marriage, Red Mesa had a near-catastrophic quarter. Oswald had over-leveraged on a bad bet in Utah. I spent 3 sleepless weeks unwinding the deals, renegotiating with creditors, and saving the company from the brink. When the dust settled, I made Oswald a demand. We are restructuring the family assets, I told him. Everything. For our future. For Grant's. He owed me. He agreed. I designed the structure myself. A 3-tiered trust system, named not for finance, but for the land we lived on. The Evergreen Trust, the Sage Trust, and the Cinder Trust. Evergreen held the core assets, the land, the buildings. Sage held the liquid investments. Cinder was the failsafe, the seed fund, empty but structured for a new beginning. And I wrote Appendix D. Oswald's lawyers called it the debt reversal provision. I called it a lesson in consequences. It was simple. Buried in the legalize. If the primary heir Grant took specific actions, control would be wrested from him. The triggers were precise first. Activating leverage beyond a predefined risk threshold, without the co-trustees' consent. Second, engaging in public, verifiable acts of filial disloyalty. I had that term defined with surgical precision. Filial disloyalty included, among other things, the non-consensual removal of the surviving spouse from the primary residence during the first 12 months of mourning. If triggered, all assets, all voting rights, all control would automatically revert to me, Beatrice Langford, not as a beneficiary, but as the sole executive trustee. "It's harsh, Oswald had said, reading the draft. "He is your son. Oswald. He has your ambition, but not your discipline. This isn't a punishment. It's a guardrail." He finally agreed, seeing it as a way to teach Grant a lesson from beyond the grave. But he was a coward in the end. He never told Grant. He sealed it. The only original notarized copy went to our longtime family attorney, Miriam Cordova, down in Santa Fe, a woman I trusted more than my own husband. But I kept my own insurance. In that safe, beneath the envelope, was a small, linen-bound notebook. It held every code to every auxiliary account Oswald ever opened. It held a private log of his most unusual transactions. It held printed photographs of emails I was never meant to see. And it held something else. My own secret. Years ago, I had used my own inheritance to quietly purchase a significant number of put options against Red Mesa stock, set to expire in 18 months. They were a financial pull break. If Grant managed to drive the company toward a cliff, I could exercise those options, protecting a portion of the value from his recklessness. I never wanted to destroy my son. I loved him. But I saw the rot that wealth had created in him. I built a system of deterrence, a single, hidden explosive charge. And last night, by telling me to move to Maple Ridge, by bragging about his $20 million, Grant had just walked over to that charge. He had picked it up. He had lit the fuse himself. I left Boulder before the sun came up, the linen-bound journal on the passenger seat. The drive south to Santa Fe was 5 hours of cold highway, but I felt a focused, icy calm. Miriam Cordova's office was not in a glass tower. It was tucked away in an old adobe building off the plaza, a place that smelled of aged paper and dry, polished wood. Her shelves were a maze of file binders rising to the ceiling. Miriam, in her 70s, was sharp as desert glass. She didn't waste time on condolences. She offered efficiency. She had the original document waiting on her massive oak desk. "Oswald was a fool to sign it, and a coward not to tell his son," Miriam said, her voice dry. She tapped the signature page. "But he did sign it. And, crucially, he signed this appendix after the $20 million primary trust was finalized and funded. It was notarized. It is the governing document. Grant believes it's unenforceable sentimentality," I said. "Grant is wrong." Miriam slid her glasses on. "You know the triggers. You wrote them." I recited them from memory. Condition A. Any action that infringes upon my right of residency in the Canyon House within the first 12 months of the mourning period. Condition B, Miriam continued. Any reallocation of primary trust assets without the written secondary consent of the co-trustee. And Condition C, increasing the net debt ratio of Red Mesa Developments above 2.0. I pushed the linen-bound journal across the desk. "He has already triggered A and C." Miriam's eyebrow shot up. "It has been 48 hours. Beatrice?" "He is efficient," I said. I opened the journal. First, this. A printout of the email he sent last night. a formal eviction notice citing financial optimization and giving me 30 days. Miriam read it and nodded, a grim tightness to her mouth. That's condition A, blatant, foolish, and C. This, I said, turning the page to a document that had been couriered to the Red Mesa office this morning, which my contact there immediately forwarded to me. An invoice confirmation for a high-interest bridge loan. He is attempting to double down on a speculative desert project in Yuma, Arizona. The interest rate is predatory. Miriam scanned the numbers. He's already blown past the 2.0 ratio. He did this in one afternoon. He's celebrating his 20 million, I said. He thinks he's invisible. I also included emails from Savannah, pressing him to sell the house immediately to free up liquidity for their personal acquisitions. Miriam closed the file. This is more than enough. I am officially notifying Three Rivers Trust, the administrative bank, of the triggering events. As of this moment, they will be legally required to freeze Grant's signatory authority pending a full review. I left her office and sat in my car in the high desert sun. My work, however, was not finished. I made a second call, not to my lawyer, but to my private broker. This is Beatrice Langford, I said, my voice steady. I want to exercise the put options, all of them. Lock in the price immediately. This was my personal insurance. While Miriam tied up the trust, I was strangling Grant's stock. With the options exercised, the value of my Red Mesa shares was now locked in at their pre-disaster price. When Grant's reckless Yuma spending inevitably caused the stock to tank, the banks holding his new loans would see their collateral evaporate. But the real trap was the Yuma project itself. Grant, in his haste, thought he was expanding the empire. He hadn't done his homework. Oswald had purchased that barren stretch of Arizona land a decade ago, under a shell company I created for him, Blue Coyote LLC. He bought it, couldn't get the permits, and abandoned it. When I structured the three-tiered trust, I quietly rolled Blue Coyote LLC and its sole asset, the Yuma plot, directly into the Evergreen Trust. Grant was borrowing millions at a criminal interest rate to develop land that he, through the trust, already owned. He was paying interest to himself and hemorrhaging cash to do it. And the final irony. As co-trustee of the Evergreen Trust, the final signature required to actually break ground on that land, to move one shovel of dirt, was mine. The plan was set. Miriam would freeze his bank access. My options would choke his stock value. And his own flagship project was an illusion, built on quicksand. He was busy pulling levers, thinking he was a king, not realizing I had built the machine. I wasn't going to stop him. I was going to let him pull the one lever that brought the entire structure down on top of himself. Legally. Irreversibly. Grant and Savannah returned to the Canyon House 2 days later, not for a visit, but for a strategy meeting. They found me in the dining room, setting the table for one. "We brought dinner," Savannah announced, holding up a greasy bag of takeout. She dropped it on the antique sideboard, her gesture dismissive. "We need to be practical, Mother," Grant said, pulling out his father's chair at the head of the table. He did not sit, but leaned on it. "The house is going on the market tomorrow. The agent says we can get a cash offer by the end of the week if we stage it right." Savannah pulled several glossy brochures from her designer handbag and fanned them out on the table like a poker hand. "I did the research you asked for, honey," she said to Grant, then turned to me. "Maple Ridge is nice, but the Pines has a much better social calendar. Look, They have watercolor classes. She slid a picture of a sterile, sun-blasted room toward me. I looked at the brochures, then at my son. I placed the single fork I was holding onto the placemat. Grant. Savannah. You should not have come here. This is my house now, Mother. Or it will be, as soon as the title clears. You should let your lawyers speak to my lawyer, I said, my voice quiet. Grant let out a short, sharp laugh. Your lawyer. What? The local notary who did Dad's will, Mother. You don't understand this level of finance. You don't understand the law. I met his gaze, the gaze of a boy playing dress-up in his father's suit. I understand it perfectly, Grant. I wrote the clause. He frowned, momentarily confused, but Savannah interrupted. Ugh, the lighting in this foyer is just dead. She pulled out her phone and started walking through the living room, snapping photographs. I'll send these to the agent. They'll want to digitally remove all this heavy, dark furniture. It's so dated. That dated furniture is a set of original Stickley, I said. Exactly. Dated. She snapped a picture of the fireplace. I watched her for a moment, then went to the hall closet and pulled out my purse. I had not been idle. While she took pictures of the house, I had already arranged for the contents to be moved. The antique silver, Oswald's art collection, my grandmother's china. It was all sitting safely in a climate-controlled storage unit I had rented under a private name. She was taking pictures of an empty, staged shell. As she was composing a shot of the dining room, Grant's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, his face darkening. What is it? Savannah asked, not looking up from her phone. It's the bank, Grant hissed, scrolling. 3 Rivers. They're holding the second disbursement for the Yuma project. They say they're pending co-trustee verification. What the hell does that mean? I simply sipped my water. It means you, Mother. He snarled, finally understanding. You did this. I did nothing, I said, which was the truth. The trust is simply operating as designed. I don't have time for this. The contractors need the next wire transfer by Monday. He furiously typed on his phone. Savannah looked worried. It's fine. He snapped at her. It's a blockage, a bureaucratic snag. I'll just root around it. I'll sign the personal guarantee. I'll back the loan myself. The 20 million is liquid. I almost smiled. That was it. That was the second trap. By signing a personal guarantee, he was co-mingling his inheritance with corporate debt, a direct violation of the co-trustee clause. He had just personally tied his own new fortune to the high-interest debt on the Yuma project. Are you finished? I asked. Grant looked up, triumphant. See solved, now, about your move. I left them in the dining room and retreated to my sewing room. I closed the door on their plotting. I sat in my chair and pulled the linen-bound journal from the drawer. Tucked inside was a photograph I had kept, one that wasn't in the main albums. It was Oswald and a teenage Grant, standing on the raw dirt of the very first Red Mesa site. They were both grinning, holding shovels. I warned you, Oswald, I whispered to the photograph. I warned you he wasn't ready. That night, after they had left, I took a sheet of my heaviest cream-coloured stationery. I wrote 7 lines in my clearest script. You have 72 hours to retract the personal guarantee you signed today. You have 72 hours to rescind the eviction notice for the Canyon House. If you fail to do both, I will instruct Miriam Cordova to enforce Appendix D in full. I had a courier deliver it to his home. An hour later, my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't know. It was a screenshot. Grant, in his arrogance, had found my handwritten note so absurd, so pathetic, that he had taken a photograph of it. He had sent it to his group chat of investor friends. My mother thinks she's a corporate raider. His caption read, followed by a laughing emoji. She's threatening me with paper. One of his friends was not a friend at all. He was a source. The recipient of that screenshot, a well-known and very hungry local real estate reporter. The countdown had begun. The first domino fell less than 12 hours later. The real estate reporter, smelling blood, ran the story. It was not just about my note. He dug deeper. The article appeared on a prominent financial blog, Red Mesa Developments in Turmoil After Founder's Death. It detailed Grant's optimization plan, the eviction of his 62-year-old mother, and, most damningly, the internal trust dispute. That leak was all it took. A private credit rating agency, which held the paper on Red Mesa's commercial bonds, immediately downgraded the company's outlook from stable to negative. The interest rate on Grant's massive Yuma bridge loan, which was variable, instantly jumped by 2 percentage points. Simultaneously, my broker confirmed the execution of my put options. My shares were locked at their high value, but Grant's identical. Unhedged shares were now plummeting as the market reacted to the bad press. His primary bank, seeing their collateral-to-loan ratio collapse, issued an immediate margin call, demanding he post millions more in assets to secure his personal loans. He didn't have millions. He had the $20 million trust, which Miriam had successfully frozen. The news hit Yuma like a shockwave. With the Three Rivers Trust account locked, the second tranche payment to the Yuma contractors did not arrive. The site foreman, unable to pay his crew, called a strike. All the heavy machinery, the bulldozers and excavators Grant had leased at enormous expense, sat silent in the Arizona desert, baking under the sun. I received a frantic alert from my bank. Savannah, in a blind panic, was trying to maintain liquidity. She had spent the morning selling her new convertible and Grant's collector sports car for cash. But when she tried to deposit the cashier's checks, the bank flagged the transaction. Our personal accounts, which Grant had foolishly tried to merge with the disputed trust, were now also temporarily frozen, pending the outcome of the dispute. A formal notice arrived from the Arapahoe County Court. Miriam's petition had been fast-tracked. A judge would hear emergency arguments on the validity of Appendix D in 10 days. Grant was trapped. The walls I had built were closing in. He was bleeding money from the interest hike. His stock was worthless as collateral. His accounts were locked, and his flagship project was dead. He made one final, desperate move. He went outside the system. He found a hard money lender, the kind of financial predator Oswald had always warned him about. These lenders give you cash immediately, but at a cost. Grant took a $5 million loan, due in 60 days, just to cover the margin call. The loan documents, which were leaked to me by the same source, showed a staggering 6% opening fee. By signing for that loan, he had, for the third time in a week, flagrantly violated the debt-to-asset ratio of the trust. The final call of the day was from the 3 original angel investors in Red Mesa, old friends of Oswald's. They were terrified. They called me, not Grant. "Beatrice, we need you to sign a preservation clause to protect our investment from your son's actions." One of them pleaded. "I am the co-trustee," I said. finally revealing my position. And I will not be signing. The assets are currently in dispute. I hung up, knowing their panic would triple the pressure on Grant. The evening edition of the local paper hit the stands. The front page headline, $20 million heir in legal storm. Faces, eviction of own mother. Grant's rage was immediate. He left me a voicemail, not pleading, but screaming. It was a torrent of abuse, calling me a snake, a withered old woman. He finished with a final threat. I don't care what the court says. You are out. I am sending the sheriffs tomorrow to drag you out. I deleted the voicemail. I looked at the clock. My 72-hour deadline had passed 1 minute ago. The net was drawn. I smiled and picked up the phone to call Miriam. We're ready, I said. Full activation. The Arapahoe County Courthouse is a cold, modern building that smells of floor wax and stale coffee. We were not in a grand chamber, but a sterile overflow courtroom. Judge Greeley, a woman with a reputation for zero tolerance, presided. Grant sat with a lawyer who looked like he was paid by the hour and was billing for all of them. My son looked pale, his arrogance replaced by a twitchy, angry energy. Savannah was conspicuously absent. Miriam Cordova was a master. She began by submitting the original, notarized Appendix D to the court. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and precise. This is a simple matter of contract law. She did not posture. She presented evidence. Exhibit a Grant's email. A formal notice of eviction sent to his 62-year-old mother, my client, 48 hours after his father's funeral. This is a direct, knowing violation of the filial disloyalty clause. Exhibit B, the signed personal guarantee for the Yuma Project loan. A willful commingling of personal and trust assets, expressly forbidden without co-trustee consent. Exhibit C, the new high-interest, hard money loan agreement. This document alone pushes the trust's debt ratio far past the 2.0 threshold defined in the appendix. A clear act of fiduciary mismanagement. Grant's lawyer stood, smoothing his suit. Your Honor, this is absurd. This Appendix D is a vindictive, archaic document. It's an emotional trap, not a legal one. It's against public morality to enforce a clause that would disinherit a grieving son over a simple family disagreement. Miriam waited until he was seated. This is not about a disagreement. Your Honor, this is about fiduciary misconduct. The state of Colorado has extensive precedent regarding spendthrift trusts and the duties of a trustee. Mr. Langford has failed those duties. But we have one more item. She paused. The petitioner calls Mr. Victor Hale. Grant's head snapped up. I saw the blood drain from his face. Victor Hale was Red Mesa's former internal auditor. A quiet man I had hired myself 15 years ago. Victor took the stand. He was nervous, but his voice was firm. Miriam established his credentials, then asked him about the Yuma project. Mr. Hale, Miriam asked, what were your last duties at Red Mesa? Mr. Langford, Victor said, nodding toward Grant, asked me to rebalance the projections for the Yuma project. He wanted to show a stronger cash flow projection to secure a new line of credit. And did you? No, ma'am. The numbers weren't real. The project was a cash burn. I told him so. I was fired the next day. Did someone else rebalance those books? Yes, Victor said. He produced his own set of files. I kept the originals. The ledgers submitted to the bank to secure that hard money loan they were fraudulent. A sharp intake of breath in the courtroom. Grant's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, but the damage was done. I instructed Miriam. I was not asking for criminal charges. I did not want my son in jail. I just wanted the trust enforced. Judge Greeley had heard enough. She silenced the room. The argument that this clause is against public morality is rejected. The greater offence to morality is Mr. Langford's conduct. He has proven himself, by the very definitions written into this trust, to be incapable of managing it. Her ruling was swift. The triggers have been met. Appendix D is valid and hereby enforced. The court orders that Beatrice Langford be installed as the sole executive trustee for the Evergreen, Sage, and Cinder Trusts, effective immediately. She signed the order. The court will notify Three Rivers Trust by fax. All signatory authority is transferred. Mr. Langford's access is revoked. It was done. Grant was broken. He stood up so fast his chair fell over. He pointed a shaking finger at me across the courtroom. You planned this. You ruined my life, you witch. The bailiff moved toward him. I stood for the first time, my hands steady. I gave you a 72-hour opportunity, Grant, I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. You said I was threatening you with paper. As we gathered our briefcases, Miriam walked over to Grant's defense table. His lawyer was frantically whispering to him. Miriam placed a single, blue, legal-sized envelope on the table in front of them. It was not a threat. It was the only way to save him from prison for the fraudulent ledgers. The offer was simple. Grant would assume full personal responsibility for the predatory hard money loan. He would surrender every luxury item purchased since the funeral. He would publicly rescind the eviction. In return, the trust, under my control, would quietly settle the Yuma corporate debts, burying his fraud. It was the only lifeline I would offer. It would take his money, his pride, and his home. But it would keep his name off a criminal docket. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Savannah did not even wait for Grant to get home. When he arrived at their sterile, glass-walled mansion, she was gone. She had left a separation agreement on the kitchen island and taken one suitcase of clothes. She couldn't take anything else. The sports car was already repossessed, and the court order Miriam had filed gave the trust priority lien over any assets purchased with funds commingled from the estate. Her jewelry, her designer bags, her art, all were now subject to seizure. Grant's day got worse. He found a team of court-appointed marshals at his home. They were not there for Savannah. They were there for the house itself. The mansion, it turned in, had been one of Oswald's leveraged purchases, secured not with cash, but with shares from the Evergreen Trust. It was, and always had been, a trust asset. The marshals were sectioning off the west wing, placing seals on the doors. While he was being locked out of his own home, I was having the locks changed on mine. I returned to the Canyon House not as a widow in mourning, but as the executive trustee. The court ruling was clear. My residency was absolute. When Grant finally drove up, defeated, he found the front gate was closed. His access code no longer worked. He was, quite literally, left on the street. I spent that first evening not in celebration, but in work. I moved the sewing machine out of my small office and replaced it with a large whiteboard. I was no longer an accountant for churches. I was the acting CEO of a deeply wounded company. I drew up a plan to stop the bleeding. My first call was to the foreman of the YP project. The man was furious. expecting to be cheated. "This is Beatrice Langford," I said. "I am in control of the Red Mesa Trust. You will have a certified check for 30% of your outstanding invoices by tomorrow. This is not a restart. This is a payment to not demolish the work already done. I want the site preserved for sale." He was silent, then agreed. My second call was to a woman I knew at the High Plains Conservancy, a non-profit land trust. "I have a parcel in Arizona," I told her, "and another one by the river here in Colorado. Both are now under my stewardship. I am looking to liquidate them quickly, but only to a buyer who will prioritize environmental restoration." This was my move to generate clean capital. My third act was public. I called the auction house. Oswald had a collection of vintage cars he adored. I had them appraised and announced a public sale, with 100% of the proceeds going to a new charity I had established, the Clean Nail Fund, dedicated to supporting victims of construction fraud and wage theft. The newspapers, which had loved the story of the evil son, now had a new narrative, the 62-year-old widow, cleaning up the mess and giving back to the community. Public opinion swung violently in my favor. I was cleaning up my husband's legacy and my son's disaster. Then, the inevitable arrived. A notice, forwarded to me as head of the trust. It was from the hard money lender. Grant, in his new, humiliating rented apartment, had missed his first interest payment. The lender was ruthless, per the contract. They were giving him 30 days' notice before seizing his remaining personal belongings to cover the interest. He arrived at my gate that evening, on foot. He had to use the intercom like a stranger. "Mother? Please?" I let him in. He stood in the foyer he had tried to sell, looking gaunt and defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow look. "They're taking everything," he whispered. "The lender. They're going to take my clothes, my furniture. I have nowhere to go." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Just let me stay. Just for one more month. Just until I can get on my feet. In the guest room. Please." I said nothing. My gaze drifted past him, to a small, upholstered armchair in the corner. I was looking at the armrest, where the wood was still slightly split. He had broken it in a tantrum when he was 10, furious because I wouldn't buy him a new bike. Oswald had laughed and bought him the bike. I had kept the chair as a reminder. He mistook my silence for consideration. "Please, Mum," he begged. I remained silent, looking at the broken chair. I did not answer Grant's plea for a room. I looked at the broken chair. Then I looked at my son, and I told him to go home. He left, stunned, into the night. The next morning, I closed the deal. The High Plains Conservancy was thrilled. They took the Yuma parcel and the Colorado riverfront land. It wasn't a simple sale, it was a trade. The cash they paid, which was substantial, was contingent on two binding conditions. First, they had to fund a full-scale environmental restoration of the Yuma site. Second, they had to use the Colorado land to endow a permanent scholarship fund for the children of construction tradesmen. The press, once again, portrayed me as a benevolent saint. I was just a good accountant. The infusion of cash into the Cinder Trust was immediate. It was enough. It was enough to cover the principal, the fees, and the predatory interest on Grant's hard money loan. I had the power to stop the collectors from taking his rented furniture. But a gift is not a lesson. I had Miriam draft the final swap. It was a masterpiece of legal leverage. I presented it to Grant in Miriam's office. the hard money lender's final notice on the table between us. The agreement was simple. The Cinder Trust would pay his entire personal debt to the hard money lender, freeing him from his personal guarantee and saving him from financial ruin. In exchange, he would sign two things. First, he would sign away any claim, now or forever, to his glass mansion, transferring the title fully to the Cinder Trust. Second, he would sign a new, ironclad legal document affirming my undisputed, lifetime right to the Canyon House. He was trading a crushing debt he could not pay for a house he had already lost. He signed. With the trust stabilized, I officially launched the Clean Nail Fund. I held a small press conference, not in an office, but at a local diner frequented by contractors. I announced the fund would assist any tradesperson in the state who had suffered wage theft or fraudulent contracts. I never once said the name Red Mesa. I did not have to. The message was clear. The headline the next day was, 62-year-old widow turns troubled trust around, rescues local supply chain. Grant saw it. He saw me pay his loan, and then saw me, with the remaining capital, publicly promised to support the very men he had tried to ruin. He came to the house that night. He did not ask to come in. He just stood on the doorstep, looking pale. "You paid them," he said. His voice was hoarse. "The Yuma contractors, the fund, that's for them. You're using. I am using the trust's money for its intended purpose," I said. "To build things, not to gamble." He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the 38-year-old man, not the spoiled boy. He looked utterly defeated. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It was so quiet I almost missed it. "Mum, I am so sorry." I did not hug him. I did not tell him it was all right. It was not. "An apology is a word. Grant," I said. "Restitution is an action?" I then presented him with my own offer, my own rehabilitation plan. He would not be homeless. The Clean Nail Fund would pay the rent on his small, temporary apartment for 2 more months. In return, he would report to the local Builders Guild, where he would work, for free, as an internal consultant, using his knowledge to help them spot other fraudulent developers. And one more thing. The High Plains Conservancy is beginning restoration on the Yuma site, I said. They need laborers to help clear the abandoned materials. You will be on that crew for 30 days. I made him sign the agreement, not in private, but publicly, on a live-streamed Zoom call with the board of the Builders Guild. He sat at a folding table, under fluorescent lights, and signed his name, committing to 30 days of hard labor. The video went viral in our local community, from wherever she was. Savannah saw it. She posted a glamorously filtered picture of herself on social media, holding a cocktail. The caption, "Watching all this cheap theatre from afar. He was always such a terrible actor." The backlash was instant and brutal. Hundreds of people, strangers, flooded her comments, not with insults, but with facts. They posted links to the court judgment. They posted the newspaper articles. They posted the video of Grant signing his labor contract. She deleted her entire social media presence within an hour. I thought the lessons were over. I was wrong. It was the last night of the month. Grant's 30 days of labor in Yuma were complete, and his 2-month lease on the temporary apartment was ending. My phone rang. It was Miriam. "Beatrice," she said, her voice tight. "There's a problem. The hard money lender, despite having been paid in full on the principal, had found a loophole. A piece of fine print. A final conveyance penalty fee. It was $48,000. They've sent a crew to Grant's apartment, Miriam explained. They're seizing his personal effects now. I looked deeper into the file. The clause was buried. A nasty little snake. It was an administrative fee, tied not to the loan, but to the primary resident of the address. And it had been countersigned, not just by Grant, but by Savannah, in the days before she fled. It was a final, parting trap she had set for him. The terms were brutal. If the fee was not paid by midnight, Grant would be in default of his rental agreement, which the fund had co-signed. He would be evicted, immediately. He would be, in the coldest legal sense, homeless. I sat in the quiet of the canyon house. I had a choice. I could sign a check from the trust, a rounding error, and make it go away. Or I could let the clause, this final consequence, do its work. I could let him be self-educated. The rain started to fall, hard, against the glass. A cold November storm. I called Grant. Be at the house at 9 p.m. I hung up. He arrived, soaked, looking thin. His hands were calloused from the Yuma work, his face weathered. I did not offer him a towel. I led him to my office, the old sewing room. On the desk, I had placed the original Appendix D. Tucked into it was my handwritten note from that first night. I had written one more thing on it, in red pen. You chose this. He looked at the document, then at me. What is this? They're at my apartment. They're taking my bed. It's a $48,000 fee, I said. Savannah's signature is on it. You have until midnight. I don't have it. You know I don't have it. You have to pay it. I don't have to do anything. Grant. He finally broke. It was not the entitled rage of a month ago. It was the hollow collapse of a failed man. He sank into the small visitor's chair. I did it to beat you, he whispered, his voice cracking. All of it. The loans. The guarantee. I had to show him. I had to show Dad. Even though he was gone, that I was better than him, that I could win. And you were just in the way. There it was. The truth. Not malice, but a pathetic, lifelong need for an approval he could never earn. I looked at him. I looked at the rain lashing the windows. I felt nothing, just a cold, clear path. There is one last transaction, I said. I stood and went to the hall closet. I came back with a heavy-duty yellow toolbox. I placed it on the desk with a thud. Beside it, I placed a piece of paper. This is a list of 3 addresses, I said. They are the homes of 3 of the framers you left unpaid in Yuma. That is a real storm out there. Grant. And all 3 of them have reported leaking roofs tonight. They have children. They cannot afford an emergency repair. I pushed the toolbox toward him. You are an heir to a construction company. Go construct something. You have 3 hours. If those 3 families are dry by midnight, I will consider the $48,000. He stared at me, uncomprehending. You want me to fix roofs now in this? This isn't a negotiation, I said. This is the work. He looked at the list. He looked at the toolbox. He looked at the clock. And for the first time in his life, he picked up the tool. He grabbed the list and ran out the door, into the storm. I sat at my desk, listening to the rain. I did not watch the clock. At 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Grant. It contained 3 photographs, taken in the dark, lit by a flashlight. The first was a new blue tarp, lashed securely over a hole. The second was a patch of fresh shingles, slick with rain. The third was a man, Grant, his face covered in mud, giving a thumbs up next to a repaired gutter. His designer shirt was ruined. He had a broken, bloody fingernail. He had fixed 3 roofs. He had done the work. My phone was in my hand. He was waiting for my reply. I set the phone down on the desk. I turned off the screen. And I let him wait, letting the lesson of the last 2 minutes of the month sink in the cold, wet dark. The next morning, the Boulder Community Hall was standing room only. I had called a full meeting of the trust, and in the interest of transparency, I had invited the press, the bankers, and the contractors from the Clean Nail Fund. I walked to the podium. The hall was silent, filled with reporters, bankers, and a front row of men with calloused hands, the Yuma contractors. I placed 3 items on the lectern: a key to the Canyon House, a key to the Red Mesa Company vault, and the keys to Oswald's vintage cars. As of this morning, I announced, my voice amplified by the microphone, these assets are no longer in dispute. They belong, fully, to the Cinder Trust. A murmur went through the room. And the first act of the Cinder Trust is a reallocation. I continued. The glass mansion Grant Langford once occupied will be transferred. It is being gifted to the community. It will become the Langford Construction Training Center. The murmur grew louder. His former master bedroom, I added, the one overlooking the valley, will be converted into a dormitory for apprentices. Miriam Cordova stepped forward, holding a single document. The trust, under Mrs. Langford's direction, has settled the personal debts incurred by Mr. Grant Langford. Miriam stated, however, this settlement was contingent on this final, binding agreement. She looked right at Grant, who was standing in the back by the exit, holding a single duffel bag. Mr. Langford hereby renounces all future claims to the Langford estate. Miriam read, he will immediately vacate any and all trust properties. Before the room could react, a man in an expensive suit pushed his way down the aisle. It was the representative from the hard money lender. This is not settled, he shouted. There is an outstanding penalty fee, $48,000, due today. We are not included in your trust settlement. I had been waiting for him. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single, pre-signed check. I held it up for the cameras. I have the check for $48,000, I said, my voice cutting through his. I looked directly at the back of the room, at my son. The trust is paying this, not for the debt, but in exchange for 3 roofs repaired in a storm last night. I handed the check to the lender's representative, Grant, holding his bag. Understood. This was the end. He did not look at me. He turned, his head bowed, and pushed open the heavy doors of the hall. The doors swung shut, sealing him out. I saw his future in that moment, a cot in a temporary room, a bus schedule, the long, hard climb back from zero. Savannah would not be there. I turned back to the microphone. My eyes were dry. This was never revenge, I said to the room. It was a consequence. This house, this trust, was built on the labor of good people. It will no longer be a source of private games. From now on, in this organization, laborers will sleep warm in the rooms where banquet halls used to be. The front row, the men with the dusty boots, began to clap. It was not loud applause, but a slow, solid, respectful beat of calloused hands on denim. The cameras turned to them. I left the hall and drove to the mansion. A marshal was already there, tacking the official court order of transfer onto the grand oak doors. I walked past him to the new bronze plaque that was being installed on the gate. It read, Langford Construction Training Center. I placed my hand on the cool metal. I knew the cameras were behind me, but I looked straight ahead. Those who build with debt and lies, I said, will stand on the porch in a rainstorm of their own making. The lights faded, and from the workshop behind the main house, a new sound began, the sharp, clear, rhythmic strike of hammers. The first class had begun. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so curious. Where in the world are you all listening from? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a like, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.